Who's ready? Go on in, Chief. Okay, so I think we can get underway here. Here's how we're going to be forced to handle the media conference. So we're going to give you every detail conceivably possible because I know in my own now over 3 decades of experience, there's a direct connection between providing information to the public and getting good solutions on this. The problem and the caveat that I want to make sure that's well understood is that I can only give you detail that we have confirmed and corroborated. And we're at a fairly rudimentary, fairly fundamental level of this investigation. And I should say this, I should say 2 investigations because here are the realities. We've got one investigation that I think is the most important one that we talk about today at this moment, and that is the public safety investigation. That is doing everything we can to get you information to make sure that you are well armed and the community is well armed to call us. So we want to provide you with kind of a baseline of what we know right now, and we're going to avoid what we don't know until we do know better. And then the second component of the investigation is looking internal to ask ourselves the question of how did this happen, because here are the realities. There are systems and controls in place for how it is that you transport prisoners, how you run institutions and all those things. So this, in almost every case that you have a set of circumstances like this, it's not a matter of a lack of policies, a lack of systems, a lack of structure. It's a matter of somehow or another we failed in that structure. So it's going to be very important to simultaneously make sure that we're taking a real good look at ourselves to figure out how this happened and make sure that we do our best to prevent it in the future. But let's do this if I can. Let's start with the most important and the most immediate and most urgent issue at hand, and that is bringing these escapees back into custody. That's the most important thing. So what we do know is that we began a transport process last night. And I'm going to call it a process because there's got to be some confusion on how it is that you began in one place and end at another. So let me explain to you that when we do statewide transports, what happens is we know that there are inmates at different institutions within the state that must be picked up, dropped off, and those sorts of things. And so we schedule out a route that allows us to pick up, drop off, and ultimately end in a transport process to better use our resources. So last night, or yesterday I should say, we left the Central New Mexico Corrections Facility there in Los Lunas, New Mexico at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We left there with inmates. We then next came to the penitentiary here in Santa Fe, just right down the road from where we speak today. And we picked up 4 more inmates, to include the 2 that are in question and have escaped. We next arrived at the Roswell Correctional Center in Roswell, New Mexico, where we dropped off inmates and picked up another, and ultimately left with our destination in mind being the Southern New Mexico Corrections Facility in Las Cruces. So what we do know is that somewhere in that process, and we're beginning to narrow our field of focus on where perhaps that could be, but we don't have it well enough corroborated now. I think it's important that we keep in mind that anywhere between, I think it's safe to say, anywhere between Roswell and the Southern New Mexico Corrections Facility, this escape occurred out of the transport van. We do know this. We know that there was a fuel stop that occurred in Artesia. So I think it's very important as we try to cull through the facts and get the best information we can, that we do our best to focus the community's attention statewide, but specifically focus in where we know might have offered the greatest likelihood for the escape. And that would have been at a fuel stop, anytime we're stopping in a transport process. So those are the facts, sort of the general facts that we do know that we can report that are important for the community to know. We have given you information in terms of what these inmates look like. We've tried to drill down with greater specificity on the distinctiveness of them, because I think that's important, right? We know, although we don't know that that's the case now, but we know they left in white paper suits, as they do, routinely. We know that they were fully shackled by handcuffs, by belly chains, by black box, by leg shackles. We know that. And we know that physically there's some distinctive markings related to each one of these inmates. We know, for example, that inmate Claw, Lionel Claw, who's missing, had a tattoo of a feather on his left cheekbone. Pretty hard to miss. We know that Joseph Cruz had the tattoo of Alias on the back of his neck. We know he had a tribal sign on his right ear, and he had a tattoo of a smiley and 13 on, I believe, his right elbow. So those are important things that we want to focus in. We know what they look like when they would have escaped, and we know there are certain features about them that they can't change, and it's those tattoos that are going to be the most apparent identifiers that are going to be available for the community to see. We know of no other wherewithal that they have. We have no direct information in terms of where they might have gone, what they might have done, whether or not a vehicle has picked them up. Here would be the most important connection that I know with the community. Oftentimes, whenever I have been running these types of cases in my career, we have appealed to the community to help us. And I've always been concerned that people not make value judgments about what it is that they may see or believe to be suspicious. We are running this thing statewide with a number of different law enforcement agencies, our security threat management from the state, local, and even federal resources. We're throwing every bit of technology, every bit of resources that we have at our disposal, but at the end of the day, it's really probably going to be solved by someone calling us. And it's going to be solved by someone making sure that they're not making a value judgment about what they saw. If they see anything that remotely resembles something that would make them suspicious, let us make that call. Just pick up the phone, call 911, do not approach any of these individuals, we consider them dangerous, and let us make the phone call to make sure that the resources that we have in posture, statewide, can be appropriately dispatched to handle the situation. The state police are our primary partners in terms of the criminal investigation and the fugitive hunt. So we will be parallel supporting that with our fugitive apprehension and our own security threat management resources, but they will be running the criminal investigation on the fugitive hunts as we look internally at ourselves and examine our system of controls. And that's probably the bulk of the information that I'm going to be able to provide you. We're happy to take questions. I would ask the caveat that if it is a question that I can't confirm, I'm not going to be able to answer that at this point. Or if it involves a bit of information that is critical to the investigation that the investigators need to hold back, I won't be able to do that. What I can't do right now is risk taking the legs out from under our investigative teams that are out there, because we are committed wholeheartedly to making sure that we return these two doggone fugitives back to custody. So with that, I guess we could just open up for questions. I'm sure there are plenty. Yes, sir.
Where's the focus of the search, and how wide is the dragnet?
Well, I think the focus right now, generally. Let me go macro and then. And the Southern New Mexico Corrections Facility. We want to make sure that we're not missing anything. But we do know that we were most vulnerable in that transport at the fuel stop that occurred in Artesia. We believe that the probability would be greater that we ask citizens in the Eddy County and the Chavez County areas to be vigilant, but we do not want to reduce the vigilance of anyone in our state at this point, because we can't tell you exactly where they went. There's been a number of hours that is now transpired, so they could be anywhere in the state for that matter. But our focus right now is trying to reconstruct what we're doing and what happened in that particular area. And again, I can't really go into any more detail because that would kind of now fall into our New Mexico State Police partners, and I don't want to compromise the investigation at
Can
any
you give
level.
us more on the history of the inmates?
Well, as you know, they both are come with some very serious crimes. We know that as we provided to you, we know that inmate Cruz was in custody for convictions on first-degree homicide out of Colfax County, which is the Raton, New Mexico area. We know that he had also been convicted of attempted first-degree homicide and a child abuse that had not resulted in great bodily harm. We know that inmate Claw had been convicted out of San Juan County. He had been convicted for armed robbery, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, assault with the intent to commit a violent felony upon a peace officer, and both of those inmates had been held and were being held prior to the transport here at the penitentiary with the determination of transporting them to the Southern New Mexico Corrections Facility.
How many corrections officers are in a van when prisoners are getting transported? And can you describe how things are supposed to go during a fuel stop, like what the protocol is?
Well, and again, I will beg your pardon in terms of protocol specific to those security kind of classified protocols on what we do on transports. Controls that ask us and direct us to check those inmates, check locks, and those sorts of things. So again, I would underscore this, that this isn't a matter of an immature system of control. This is a breakdown in a system of control that we have to identify where and how and under what circumstances did that system of control break down. But it's not a matter of weak policy or anything. There are good policies.
Around what time was this noticed?
We had the notice occurred just shortly before 1 o'clock this morning upon the arrival and disseminations of the remaining inmates at the Southern New Mexico Corrections Facility.
And what time would the fuel stop have been?
The fuel stop would have been somewhere in the neighborhood, I'm trying to recall a specific time, of about 8:30 last night.
And was the vehicle left unattended at any time completely during that?
Nothing that we're aware of right now, but I'm going to be very cautious to answer any of those kinds of questions until we've had an opportunity to really systematically and thoroughly examine this. Obviously, again, I would point to the fact that we have to acknowledge that there is a breakdown in the systems of control. So that could have happened. I don't know yet, but we'll obviously make sure that that what we're doing to look at that breakdown, looks at that eventually.
How many other inmates were on board the vehicle at this time?
Well, it varied at times because
Sure,
there were
Roswell and Las Cruces.
between Roswell and Las Cruces. There would have been 5,
Including the two? Or?
including the 2.
Are the other 3 helping you at all with the investigation that you're?
And again, a great question. I hope you won't confuse my inability to answer that with me as a personality. I'm not going to go into detail, nor would I, again, take the legs out of our state police partners in this.
If possible, can you talk about, are these officers who are experienced with transports? Can you talk about that?
They are officers who have experience and are assigned exclusively to our transport unit. They are.
Has the state been in touch at all with the victims or witnesses, any people involved in the cases for which these people were convicted?
Yes.
They have been in touch?
That was a priority to make sure that notifications went out.
And is there anything that's being, any assistance provided to them in consultation?
Again, I would have to refer it to our law enforcement partners, but I would answer generally, and I think it would be all right. Yes, we will and support them.
I don't know the answer for what assistance may be provided. They have been contacted. Anything additional to that, I'm not prepared to answer. I don't know all the things that have been taking place on that end.
Is there a hold on any other transports at the moment, or are you continuing business as usual?
No, there obviously would be. For any non-emergency transports, we have halted those because obviously a situation like this demands that we look at how that breakdown occurred and make sure that we are limiting any other exposure that could come with a breakdown. So unless it is a medical emergency of sorts, there are no transports happening right now until we get clarity on this.
Can you shed any light on how it's possible that several hours went by and that no one noticed this until they arrived at the other facility?
It's a van without a window. Obviously, again, because I just don't know and I don't want to drift into an area of just utter assumption, I think it's reasonable to say that that our systems of control would otherwise tell us that checks be made, and we are examining to what extent checks were and could have not been made now, but we just don't have the detail at this particular
Is there a
point.
protocol for how often?
There are protocols that dictate, again, they're not something we put out public because obviously we don't want them countered, but there are protocols I can answer generally on how it is that you do checks and those sorts of things.
How many officers were accompanying them, and are they under investigation for their role?
There were 2 officers on the transport, and they are part of investigating what happened, and absolutely.
Is this the van here?
That would be the van. Thanks for handing it up. I wanted to give you kind of a snapshot of what that van looked like. That van is obviously, there is a security inset inside the van. So although it looks like a regular van, there is an inset in there. And the tow trailer behind it is a property trailer. So when inmates are transported, their property goes with them, and that's the van.
So you said it was a van without a window. What are you referring to? Is it between the drivers and the passengers?
There's a wall between the drivers and the passengers. If you could see into that particular van better, it's a little bit more difficult to, but there is an insert in there. Those windows come from the factory, but there's an insert inside. Between those doors that are factory installed, there's another set of non-factory aftermarket security insert, for lack of a better term. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, but there not being a window, you mean that there's no way for people who are in front to see people in back?
There's no way to look out on the outside,
Okay.
and the insert in the back doesn't allow for much visual looking out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your best assumption, and I realize I'm asking for an assumption, are you thinking this is an escape of opportunity, or is this something that you believe may have been planned and then executed?
I think again, I can't speak because it would be an assumption, but I think it's fair to answer your question that this must be investigated as something more organized, right? I mean, we have to look at that. We can't just assume an opportunity, right? Because if we limit ourselves to that, we miss all sorts of potential things that we need to find out to either hold ourselves accountable or hold those inmates accountable. So our assumption right now, until anything proves it different, would be that this was planned and not planned. And if we find out by investigating as it planned that it was opportunity, well, then we'll find out that way. But I wouldn't want to go the other way, because then we're liable to miss some very important things.
Have you contacted their family members or anyone that knows them to see if they're contacting them?
We are being very thorough in what we do, and perhaps I could go back and look
But
at
is there
that.
anything that indicates that they've had any communications or communications outside the ordinary?
Great question. I would respond to saying this. I don't remember the specific event you're talking about, although that'd be an interesting thing to check on. But to assume that we're not being very thorough and looking at everything for any possible evidence that would help us would be faulty too. And that's about as best I can answer on something like that.
Is there any connection between the two that they would escape together at all? Do you?
Well, they're both missing at the same time,
Missing,
and
yeah.
so we don't have the detail to know whether or not there was collusion or anything. And again, that's going to be left up to the investigators to determine for us.
And we're going to go ahead and just complete the this press conference at this time. And there are a lot of questions, and understandably, that is something that we are looking into as the New Mexico State Police being the primary investigative agency. And the questions that you asked are questions that we have as well. So we are looking into those things. We are conducting a very thorough investigation. We're following up on any and all leads that are given to us, and we are exhausting all resources from our agencies, from federal agencies, from other local agencies. So again, without being specific on details related to our investigation and the procedures that we're using, I can assure you that everything we're doing is thorough, and until we know more or have more information to give, then that's really all we have at this time. So thank you all for coming. And so we have a command post set up in the Artesia area. We also have another one in the Alamogordo area, just because there's extensive ground that may have possibly been covered. So we also have another command post stationed here at this location. So all that information is being shared and will continue to. So once we have more, we'll update you as well.
What should the public do should they encounter these two? Maybe that
So any encounters with any possible encounters, the public needs to call 911. State Police we've got a number designated as far as the State Police Office in Roswell, but call 911. And anything, whether it may be a possibility, if they're unsure, just call 911.
Defer on the side of just, thoroughness, and to whatever extent you can take good notes and give us good information, that's how we.
One more thing is, when was the public first notified and how?
I believe the public was notified this morning via a press release sent out by the New Mexico State Police. And yes, that's correct. So information we gathered, and as soon as we had that information available to send out to the public, we did so. So again, thank you all, and as soon as we have more we'll get that out.
As far as these inmates are concerned with lengthy sentences, obviously 30 years at life, is there a concern that those guys are out there and don't have too much to lose as far as?
No, absolutely. They're definitely considered dangerous. So the public should be concerned, and they are considered dangerous, and definitely not to be taken lightly. So, all right, thank you all.
I tell you this, though, we would make that assumption whether or not they have this criminal history or not, right? But certainly because.
This was a corrections transport.
It was. Thank you, guys.